Strategy Simplified, welcome back to the podcast. Excited to have you today for this Bain interview demo. Now, if you've been following us for any time, you know that we regularly do these case interview demos, but today is not just that, it's also a fit interview demo. So the session features Tobe, who is a management consultant, case coach, and former Bain Associate Consultant. And he starts off by demoing what a Bain fit interview looks like with our candidate, Rashawn. So he asks a couple of great fit or behavioral interview questions so you can see what this looks like. Next, he moves into a fun Bain-style case. You're going to want to pay attention, follow along with a pencil and paper, and see if you can crack the case alongside Tobe and Rashawn. Tobe loves working with candidates one-on-one to help them prepare for case interviews at firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Accenture, Deloitte, EY, and more. So check out the links in the show notes to learn what it takes to work with him via one-on-one coaching. Let's get into the episode.
Thanks, Rashawn, for joining us today. It's been great having you through the process. I'm just going to go through a couple of questions. And maybe first of all, start by looking through your CV and your journey. So I have your CV in front of me, so you don't have to regurgitate the entire thing. Maybe tell me something that's not on your CV and how that's drawn you here today.
I think the part would be, and I think that's an interesting fact, is I've had the opportunity, to see the entire life cycle of a company. So, just coming in as an undergraduate, who doesn't know anything about supply chain or any company. So, being the founding member of a startup, actually laying down the foundations for the supply chain, scaling it, expanding it, and then eventually, actually also, participating in the liquidation of the startup and up until the end point. I think, that's been an exciting journey. That the resume might not truly capture, but I think, that's truly been an awesome experience, in terms of learning, in terms of honestly just the experience itself. So I think that's something, that really goes a long way, to describe who I am.
Okay. Makes absolute sense. And I guess what triggered that journey from startup to where you are right now in front of us?
So absolutely. I think, working in a startup, it's working with a lot of fires every day, working on a lot of problems and, iterating on your own. And I think, that's something that I've picked up in two aspects is, I've seen that side, we're working on strategy yourself, but, I really want to, work with excellent people, intellectual people, like-minded people. Who are tackling that those problems on a daily basis, and then talking about those problems. I think in consulting, you have the opportunity to work on exciting problems each day in terms of industry, in terms of even whatever segment you want to do. So I think those two would be the reasons. Working with people who have more experience than me and learning from them, and then secondly working with a myriad number of problems to expand my learning.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So I'm going to give you a couple of questions, or probably just one each in this case because of time. So one to do with a past situation that you've been in the past and how you dealt with certain problems, and then a future-facing one, so a hypothetical one, for which you can also draw in past experiences if you want to use that as an anchor. So Rashawn, describe a time to me when you've had to work with someone who had a different perspective or opinion. How did you handle the situation and what did you learn from it?
Perfect. I think, working in a startup, you get daily encounters, because you're working with this, diverse set of people. I think the encounter that I had, would probably be the CFO. So the situation was, that I was leading the national expansion for Chuknu. That was a startup based back in Pakistan. As the person who was leading the expansion, we were actually deciding on, which of the fulfillment centers or, which cities we wanted to expand into. Eventually, the problem arose, that we were deliberating when we wanted to expand. So the timelines of the expansion, were up to question. I actually had a long-sighted approach where I actually wanted to make sure that we were able to, do our due diligence on the plans, see all the risks, see all the hiring timelines, and then actually incorporate. The CFO, based on a number of his perspectives, wanted that we expand, in the short term because they wanted to drive the revenue from another city. So I think that's somewhere, where the disagreement rose in one of the meetings where I was expanding and expressing the strategy plans. So I think the task at hand, was actually seeing the perspective of the CFO and, actually also delivering, what my perspective was. So based on that, what eventually I did after initial meeting where I, presented the expansion strategy was actually locking a one-on-one meeting with the CFO to understand, what their perspective was and, where they were coming from. Based on that, I was able to understand what exactly their ask was and, which obviously went along, with the broader strategy of, what the company wanted to achieve in the short term. I then, in that meeting explained my perspective on, being on ground, having, seen things, how meticulous planning would be able to, add much better results in the long run. Based on that, I did that. So the CFO asked me to draw up an exact Gantt chart or like a timeline plan on, how the exact each steps would go. I did that, worked on that extensively, built out several numerical models where I showed, how the short term and the long term would go, how the profitability and the revenues would look. Locked in another meeting, where we actually went back and forth on, several perspectives on the presentation. Eventually, what we decided to do was, that based on that, come down to a middle ground, where we actually not in the long run, but in the short run, a medium size timeline we were looking to expand. As a result, I think what we achieved was two things. The CFO in itself, had some more trust on the expansion strategy because of the meetings that I did with him. We were able to launch the fulfillment center, with a lot more meticulous planning. The rollout and the launch was super smooth, and eventually, we did increase our revenues in terms of launching a recipe.
Okay, that sounds really interesting and impactful. So looking forward, hypothetically, imagine you were staffed on multiple projects across two partners, potentially across two geographies as well. So London, Amsterdam. This is actually possible, pretty rare, but possible. How do you prioritize delivering for clients to a very high standard while also making sure that you are checking in on your well-being?
Perfect. I think, if you're staffed in two projects and, I'll just draw back, from my past experiences, working in a startup. So on a daily basis, you have to do a lot of, different things. So you have to handle the management stuff, handle the ongoing operation stuff. I think I would draw, from that experience. The first thing is to understand the nuance and, the kind of project that I'm doing at each location and each geography and with each partner and the kind of relationship that I have and the kind of role that I'm playing. Based on that, the kind of role that I'm playing in each project, I can sort of ascertain what kind of impact I have, what kind of value addition I can do, and what's expected of me. So I think considering those variable factors, essentially a project, which has maybe a shorter timeline, which has more expectations of me, and where I can add more value and more impact, I think that's the one, that gets the first priority. Other than that, then the second project just naturally follows along. In those, two things, it's also important to, maintain a work-life balance. So, at least personally, what's worked for me is having a very disciplined and organized calendar. So ensuring all of my meetings are locked in, all of my connects with the team are locked in. And also, my expectations and, connects with the partners are locked in. So, having bi-weekly connects on the projects to see, where we're heading in terms of direction, where we're expecting, how my performance is going on each of those projects. I think, those would be important. So I think organized calendars, communication, and, just having a bird's eye view of, each project, I think that's going to help me prioritize better.
Okay, it sounds really credible. Maybe just wrapping it up right now. What's your biggest driving force in life? What drives you as a person?
I think the biggest driving force would be finding purpose and delivering impact. I think that's what drew me to the startup as well. We were working with retailers on ground. We were creating daily impact. We were adding value, and I think that's something that I seek to do in everything that I do. So I think even for the case that I'm doing right now, I think I'm adding value for you and I'm adding value for myself. So I think that's the main pillar that I strive for. Whatever I do on a daily basis, that has some impact on myself or or the company or the person that I'm working for.
Okay, that concludes this part. I was actually going to give feedback at the very end, but I think because we're dividing this into fit and case study, it probably makes a lot of sense to actually just give feedback now. So on the fit section, at least. So on the CV walkthrough, so I'll just talk through what went really good, what could have been improved on, and then what I think is an overall score as well for each question. So I felt like overall that was a bit of a 7. It was a very interesting sort of off-CV story with the life cycle of a startup, really concrete reasons for why you were transitioning into consulting. I think what was missing and why it wasn't a 9 or a strong 8 or a 10, which is, pretty unattainable, is that I feel it wasn't storyfied. So on the CV section, you don't want to sort of list out things in a bullet point form. You want to make it seem like you're connecting the dots, even though we all know that many times we're all just leaving a randomness. there's some sense in trying to make the dots connect and make it sound like a bit more of a story. But otherwise, the actual concrete points were really good. It's just about trying to maybe storyfy that a little bit more on the CV and keeping it to under about a minute and a half. I think is very possible as well. So on describing a time when you had to work with someone and had a different perspective or opinion, I thought that was a very strong answer. So it was an 8. So what I liked about it was that I think you were highly structured. You clearly were using the STAR method. So for anyone who doesn't know, but I'm sure everyone on this call who's here probably knows, it's situation, so STAR, situation, context. You want to spend about maybe the first 30 seconds laying that down. It's sort of like in the Disney movie when you find out that potatoes can talk. They usually use the first 30 minutes to make sure everyone understands that. So lay down the context and then the task or the challenge to be solved. So what exactly triggered this thing? And then actions. And here you want to be quite staccato. So this is very, very, very good time to sort of just go bullet points. So the way Rishan handled the CV question. So I did this, I did that, I did this. If you can put numbers to it and quantify it even better. Then the results. So I thought that was a very strong part. You want to sort of, again, put numbers if you can. I think it always makes it seem better. So I thought you were really structured. I could tell where you were on every part of the case when you transitioned from situation to task to action to results. I think to make that an 8.5 or 9, it would have been nice to add a nice flourish at the end. So the reflections, I know Bain were pretty keen on this when I was interviewing, and that's still a thing where you sort of reflect through how you could have handled that situation a bit better or what lessons you drew from that going forward. Would have been really nice. I thought it was a bit long and it could have been a bit more concise. So it felt like it was edging towards 3 minutes. I think it could have been maybe 2:15 to 2:30. And then finally, maybe working on switching up your cadence when you are going from one point in the STAR method to the other. So when you're going from situation, task to action to results, it was really structured, so I could tell because you took some pauses, but maybe switching up your cadence just so that it doesn't get too monotonous as well. Could have been really good to push it up to a 9. So I thought your strongest answer was, the hypothetical, imagining if you were staffed on multiple projects, how would you prioritize that? So I thought it was a very strong 9/10. I thought the story was really strong overall, like you storyfied it. I think what you did really well there that a lot of candidates don't do is that they don't always borrow from past experiences, even when because it's a hypothetical situation. I think you always should borrow from past experiences. And you were just really structured, very high impact story, like very little to improve on there. And on the driving force in life, it's not really a scored question, but I think it's one that usually throws some people off as well. So it's just one to have an answer for. But I thought that was a really good answer, by the way. But yeah, it's just one worth thinking about because it makes you seem a bit genuine. Awesome. So now we can transition to the case. There might be some questions. Please put them in the chat. I'll try to answer them at the end of the entire sort of case. So yeah, let me know if there are any questions and just put them in the chat. But now we can transition to the case. Awesome. So today we're working on the Indian Premier League. It is a cricket league in India. For any American viewers who are not familiar with the wonderful game that is cricket, it's a fantastic game. So it's one of the most popular sports in Asia and not Europe, probably just Britain, to be fair. It is a very British sport, extremely British sport. But just sort of liken it to American football. Very different paces, but it's a really big league, essentially, and very big sports. Okay, so the Indian Premier League is the world's largest domestic cricket league, and it is selling new team licenses. The IPL, the Indian Premier League, has seen tremendous growth in the past few years, attracting 300 million viewers each year. Our client is a US-based private equity firm that is wondering if they should invest in this opportunity or not, and would love your advice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think, someone from Pakistan, who has grown up, watching cricket, it does seem like an interesting business problem to solve. And, I've seen IPL, I was just, watching the recent test series. So, definitely an interesting problem. So, just so I have all the facts correctly, I think the situation at hand is, the IPL is settling out new licenses. We have a private equity firm, who wants to invest. And essentially, we want to see, whether that's the right move for them. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Perfect. I think so. Just to get started, I have a few basic questions on, so essentially on the private equity firm, what do they mostly invest in? Is that something, they're doing for the first time, investing in sports, or is that something they've done, previously as well?
So it's a really good question. So our client has some experience, not in sports. It's the first time investing in sports, but some experiences with sort of not sports teams, but sport nutrition.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Also want to understand, what the measure of success for this, acquisition or, purchasing of this license is. Do they want profit? What exactly are they looking for?
So they're excited about the cross-selling opportunities that the acquisition can provide, overall including some synergies within their portfolio companies, and they would like to generate a 20% return minimum.
Okay, perfect. And since you mentioned portfolio companies, do we have any other sports, portfolio companies in their portfolio?
Any what? Come again, please.
So do they have any other sports companies in the portfolio?
So no sports companies, but some opportunities to cross-sell products to a potential team they might buy because of sports and nutrition.
Perfect. That makes sense. Can I have a minute to orient and see how I'd like to approach this problem?
Absolutely. Take your time.
Heads up, future consultants. If you're serious about breaking into consulting, but you know that you'll need all the help you can get, join our Super Prep program to change your chances. Check out the link in this episode's show notes to confirm your seat for the next Super Prep cohort. In Super Prep, we'll help you add business and consulting experience to your resume to fill in gaps through a 1-week virtual consulting project known as Strategy Sprint. These projects run once a quarter. Next, we'll help you integrate your new consulting experience into your resume and cover letter through custom edits by our MBB team. We'll help weave a compelling narrative through your resume and cover letter to display how your unique background and skill set makes you an ideal candidate for your target firms. From there, an MBB coach will build a custom prep plan for you and guide you through case and fit interview prep. Recruiters love candidates who bring both consulting experience and polish to the table, and Super Prep will allow you to do both, plus the confidence to shine in your interviews. We run Super Prep cohorts once a quarter, so check out the link in the show notes to confirm your seat today. In addition, you can book a call with a member of our team before you join. Look forward to seeing you in Super Prep.
Perfect. I think, I know how I want to approach this. So I think my hypothesis, going in would be, that it definitely seems like a lucrative enough opportunity, for the private equity firm, to, purchase a license from IPL and, invest it in a team. I think in order for that, I would like to evaluate 4 areas, and I'll talk about them broadly, and then we can go, deeply into all of them. So I think firstly, I want to understand, the cricket and the IPL market segment in India. It definitely is, a huge segment. But what it encapsulates, what are the numbers? That's something I'd be interested in. Moving forward, the second thing, definitely want to understand, the private equities firm's capabilities. So in terms of internal capabilities, external capabilities, since it is sort of like a cross-border, acquisition per se, or, purchase of a license, definitely want to understand how that plays in. Thirdly, also want to understand, synergies, because, we mentioned, they're looking to cross-sell products, with some of, the companies in their portfolio. That's something we might be interested in. Finally, I think the fourth thing, we definitely want to be looking at the financial due diligence and risks as well. So in that, we want to talk about, what do the numbers look like for, the purchasing of the license and other regulatory stuff. Does that seem like a fair approach? And, I'd be happy to run you through each of, the segments.
Yeah, no, that seems pretty good in terms of buckets. Maybe run me through a few drivers or a few activities within those work streams, essentially.
Absolutely, I would love to. I think so. Starting from the first bucket, that is the cricket and IPL segment. I want to understand what the overall market looks like in terms of advertising revenue, streaming revenues. What the revenues have looked like for the past teams. What kind of teams are there in the IPL segment, and what do their owners look like. What has the growth been like, for the past few years, and what does the growth look like, projected into the future? That's something I'd be interested in. What are the returns and the profits for other franchises? That's something I'd be interested in as well in terms of market. What kind of customers, do watch it? Is there also opportunity to cross-sell, our products to those customers as well? That's something I'd be interested in. In terms of firm capabilities, definitely want to understand, do we have the experience, to manage an IPL team? Would we want to partner with, another entity to actually run the operations? Who would be running the operations, for running the decisions? What does a sales and marketing, strategy look like? So, after purchasing this license, how do we want to go about it? I think importantly, you do have cricket expertise. I think that's most important as well. In terms of synergies, I am actually looking at sales. So, how do we plan to, actually synergize well with the team? How do we plan to cross-sell those products? In terms of management even, because, we're talking about having some sports nutrition products, can we, derive some exact synergies, some experiences from that? And finally, for the financials, want to understand what the numbers look like for the license, what the returns could be, what the IPL due diligence looks like. Definitely interested in some regulatory factors as well, since it's a US firm, purchasing a license in India, are there any risks associated with that as well? So those are all of the important factors I'd be looking at. I think the important perspective, at least from my experience, would be starting with looking and, serving the market to see if it is the right fit for us. And, for that, looking at the market numbers, the growth would be a great starting point.
I think that's really sensible to start off with the market, but I want to take this in a slightly different direction. So if we're looking at potentially the valuation as well, we're obviously going to have to be looking at the projections in terms of cash flows, and specifically would want to project out revenue and want to project out a few cost items as well. You just run me through very quickly some revenue items that you would expect, and then some cost items as well.
Sure. So I think based off the revenue items, definitely want to, I think, segment it off into, two broader strategies. The first, segment would be, categorizing it streaming or advertising. So something I think that's not from the team itself. And the second revenue segment, would be the cross-selling of the products. So in the first one, I want to understand, what the streaming revenue looks like, what the advertisement revenue looks like. Those would be important to understand. And secondly, I think in the important broader bucket, would be the cross-selling of the products. So in case we're able to invest, how much of the revenue we can generate from additional sales in a new geography. I think that's important. In terms of cost, definitely want to be, breaking it down into, some of the fixed and the operational costs. So fixed costs, we would be, the idea would be having an idea around what's the purchase of the license cost look like, in order to, maybe hire the team or set up a facility or set up an office back in India. What would that cost look like? And then be in terms of operation salaries, definitely want to understand you want to be hiring the right team for this. So a director, a strategist, the players themselves. So, IPLs, they're known for, paying the players a lot. So, what do those costs look like for the players? And essentially, what does it cost us to run, the franchise, on a yearly basis? I think those would be important numbers.
Okay, that sounds very, very sensible. So I'm going to share an exhibit, and I'd love you to tell me what you see, walk me through some insights, and tell me what the average profit per team looks like as well for that exhibit. So just give me 1 sec, and I'll share my screen with the entire group. Grand. So if you can just have a look through that, run me through
Perfect.
what you've seen and what the average profit as well is.
Sure. So I think based on this, essentially just, orienting myself to the exhibit, we do see a bar chart, where there is, multiple teams. So we have 4 teams. On a 3-year basis, we can see, what the average profit per team has been. So, based on the bar chart, we can definitely see a trend in terms of the average finishing position as well. That's what we have below. So, 1.3, 4.3, 3.3, and 1.7. So I think definitely interesting to see, that the teams with the greater profit, they have the greater average finishing position. I think that's one of the initial conclusions that I can definitely draw. But I think I would love to, crunch some numbers, maybe on an average basis if you want me to. What does that look like per year, or, maybe for like one franchise as well? I would love to do that.
Yeah, sounds fantastic.
So I think based on that, we can definitely take an yearly approach. So just 1 second. Toby, if you could have the exhibit up, I think that would be great in terms of the numbers, or I could.
No worries. Just give me 1 sec. Fantastic.
Fantastic. And I think, the firm that I would like, or the franchise I would like to focus on, are maybe the Mumbai Indians and the Rajasthan Royals. I think, they have the greater, higher average profits. So definitely want to understand, what their average profit has been for the 3 years. So I'll do it for the Mumbai Indians first, maybe. So we can see 2020 is 25 million. Then we have 30 million for 2021. And 2022 is roughly around 27.5. So I think based off that, 55 and 27.5, that's going to be 80, roughly around. Is it okay if I round it off to 85 million for the Mumbai Indians?
Round it off is fine.
So perfect. So 85 million for the Mumbai Indians. That's going to be 85 divided by 3 as the expected profit. So that's roughly going to be 2, and that we have 60, 25, and then 24. So roughly around, I think, 28 million, that's the number that I'm seeing for the Mumbai Indians over the past, 3 years. And for the Rajasthan Royals, just judging from the trend, not crunching up the exact numbers, it does look like somewhere, in between 25 and 30. So roughly around, the same number, 27, 28 million. So I think, that's a fair, expected number that we're seeing, for the average, teams that are, placing high. For the teams that are placing low, I think the number would roughly ballpark around 17 to 18 million, as I can see from Kolkata Knight Riders or Punjab Warriors. So I think based on that, since we're a team that's coming in, as a new franchise in terms of expertise and players as well, we can roughly ballpark, what our profits would look like. I think that's the approach that I would, take. And essentially that would help us answer the initial question that we had, whether this makes a lucrative enough sense. I think so. To ballpark it around 20 million, I think that's the number that I have in mind. Is that a fair number to work with?
I think that's fair if you assume that they're going to sort of be somewhere in the average, which I think is a very fair assumption. I think if you assume that they could invest and actually be a winning side as well, then you might want to benchmark that a bit higher. But I think that's a very fair place to start. So I'm going to show you another exhibit, and I'd want you to tell me what you think our client's bid should be as a result based off that exhibit. Just give me a couple of seconds, and I'll flash that up. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
I can see your screen. Okay, I think so based off the exhibit, initial thoughts, we're looking at 2 things, revenue synergies and synergy analysis. We also do have a note that the profit multiple 25x should be used to calculate the value of the team. And, assume that a candidate can set up a championship winning team. So I think, that goes hand in hand with the information that we had in the past. So what the number we decided for maybe championship winning team, or, the teams that positioned higher, that was roughly around 28 million. So I think that's the number that we can work with, since our client, can set that up. And in terms of revenue synergies, we do have some numbers. What I essentially want to do is, based off, the profit multiple of 25x, would want to multiply that by the average profit that we had, that was 28 million, to see, what the overall profit would look like. And then, segment that into revenue and cost. So, in terms of revenue synergies, that would roughly be around, I think, 15. And, cost synergies would be around 7 to 8. And, based off that, find out what the exact numbers would be. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Yep, that sounds very sensible.
Perfect. So, just taking the number that we had, 28 million for a championship winning team, 28 divided by 25, 28 multiplied by 25 would be roughly 850, 4, 10 and 40 and then 56. So we roughly have around 700 million in terms of profit that we're expecting. So that is a great number. Definitely want to benchmark that against, what the expected returns for the private equity firm have been in the past. But, based on my initial hypothesis, I think the number does look creative enough, for the firm to invest in. So for this, segmenting it into the revenue synergies and the cost synergies. So the revenue would be roughly 15. So am I right to assume, that the revenue synergies and the cost synergies work in proportion? So revenue synergies would be 15 over 25 of the total pool of profit that we expected to generate?
Not exactly. So we have the profit, which is one thing. But then these are synergies that the private equity fund thinks that they can extract based off the portfolio companies that it has as well. So it sort of split them into the revenue synergies it thinks it can extract, and then the cost synergies it thinks it can extract as well.
Perfect. So then the idea would be, taking the numbers for the revenue synergies, that is 15, and multiplying that by 700 million, and then taking the number 8, roughly, 8 or 7, for cost synergies, and multiplying that by the profit, to see, how that would fade up. Does that sound like a fair approach?
So not quite, in the sense that I guess if you want to take the approach of thinking of yourself as a buyer, and you're analyzing a business and you're trying to figure out what the value is to you. You want to, first of all, see what the profits are for the business. You want to project that out because you're going to eventually use that to get the cash flow. But then you're thinking of the synergies as the sort of the extras, I guess, that you could also get from the business. So the additional revenue or the additional reduction in cost, which is also going to affect the profit as well. So I guess on the one hand, you have the standalone profits without synergies, and now you have the extras that you think you can extract because of synergies. So where would you like to go from there based off that information?
Perfect. So I think definitely would want to understand the drivers, for these revenue synergies and for the cost synergies. I think that would be important to understand.
Absolutely. And that's work that you would do maybe for phase 2. So for now, let's maybe just stick to calculating based off all that information, what you think a reasonable bid would be. And then we could maybe expand on that in phase 2.
Perfect. That sounds great. So I think in terms of, what an average or a good bid should look like, we do have a profits at 700 million. My understanding of, bids, even for acquisitions or, for licenses. So we definitely want to understand what the historic trend has been in terms of profit multiplied by maybe what the multiple is, for the different franchises. Do we have any information about that? Or, I can just assume, what that multiple would look like.
So on the multiples case, let's look at the footnotes. Maybe. So we have profit multiple of 25x.
Yep.
And we've applied that to the operating profit that you think is attainable. Yep. Have we added the synergies as well to that?
So we can definitely do that, I think. So 700 million was the number that we had. Adding the revenue synergies would be, 15 million, roughly. And, just adding the cost synergies, that's 7 million, roughly, looking for the numbers. So that's 722 million in terms of the average value that I'm expecting, after adding the synergies. So I think, that does sound like a reasonable, profitable bid, that we could expect for the license.
Okay. Let me stop sharing. All good. So just to recap again where we are. So in terms of the bid you are suggesting the client goes for, what number is that?
722.
722. Got it. Okay. Fantastic. So moving forward, the clients has just walked in. They're private equity clients, so they are usually short for time. They would like a recommendation based off the case prompt, and they have about a minute or so before they need to dash off.
Perfect. Can I have a minute to synthesize my thoughts?
Absolutely.
Do you want to work for a fast-growing M&A consulting and advisory firm? Then Palmtree is the place to be. Palmtree is a firm that's experienced incredible growth in recent years, even in the midst of the global economic slowdown, and hiring just keeps marching on. If you're currently an employee at a top accounting or advisory firm seeking to break into the M&A industry, or you're a student interested in learning about the M&A lifecycle, consider palm tree. Join the firm's upward trajectory and help shape the future of M&A advisory. If interested, learn more and apply on the firm's careers page, palmtreellc.com, or you'll find the link in this episode's show notes.
Perfect. So I think our recommendation to the client, the private equity firm, would be to go ahead and purchase a license in the IPL. For that, we've calculated average profits, and 722 million, does sound like the number that we would be expected to pay for the company. But based on a year basis, we will be able to draw back those profits after finding out the expenses. There are some risks associated with it. Most importantly, regulatory risks, in terms of expanding into a new country. But that can definitely be mitigated, by setting up a meeting with the IPL team to see, how our teams and how their legal teams can work to mitigate those. In terms of next steps, definitely want to be sitting down with the IPL chief, to be showing our interest, projecting our, financial proposals to them and seeing where it takes them. And I would definitely love to help you with that.
Okay. So that marks the end of the case. And I'm going to be giving feedback in detail. So just give me 1 sec. Fantastic. Awesome. So can everyone hear me? Great. So generally, overall feedback, Rishan was a very strong candidate. So starting with the fit, he was a strong candidate with the fit. I think that was probably like a pass through. On the case, he was a strong candidate, but made some mistakes, especially around the maths and the insights. That might stop him from advancing from a round 1 to round 2. So this is sort of very much a round 1 type case in terms of level of difficulty. But I think he was great overall, and I think extremely bold and confident to do this, and really good because there's parts where he really excelled in and parts where he dipped, which is great for the advantage of you guys because I can sort of go through what's good and what's not good and how you could improve on that as well. So the way I like to give feedback, usually when I case, I type and I'm scoring based off metrics. So what I'm judging, or on what every interviewer generally will be judging based on. So I give a score 1 to 4, 1 being, very poor, 4 being excellent. It could obviously be above 4 if it's very commendable, and then comments as well. And I usually send these via email so that you're having a track of every single case, the case name, the dates, and then the exact feedback in very granular form as well. So starting with the first metric, case recap, very important. I thought it was a 4. It was a great recap. That wasn't a repeat of everything I said, which is very important. So sort of summarize the main business problem before heading on to the questions. Very, very important because you want to make sure you and the interviewer are leaving from the same bus stop, especially when the cases get more and more complex. So they can run into quite a few lines. You want to make sure that you're capturing the most important points and also the exact business problem that you're trying to solve before you even do anything else. Just a quick heads up. So the first 3 metrics are sort of case recap, clarifying questions, and case structure. The good news is that Rishan scored pretty much a 4 on all of these. The bad news is that no one ever gets through to the next round or gets an offer by scoring a 4. It's sort of like table stakes. You have to do it. Maybe you dip to a 3.5 somewhere, but you're never going to get an offer just based off getting a 4 on any of these. It's where the maths, insights, exhibit readings, brainstorms, the final recommendation, that's where you really want to shine, but you kind of have to do this as a hygiene test. Okay, so next point, clarifying questions. Some people don't really care about these, but I think they're very important in the sense that there's usually things that you can unlock from them, like extra information. So really good essential questions that scope the case. It was a 4 as well. I think here, the rule of thumb for me is that you don't want to ask more than 4 questions, but the sweet spot is sort of 3. I think if you're going to ask a 4th one, then there has to be a very good reason why you're asking the 4th one, and it has to, be something that really does scope the case. There's a list of questions that you almost always want to ask, and I think Rishan did well there by sort of asking, is there a financial target they're trying to reach, for instance? Anytime there's an investment case, you want to ask that. The same way if it's a market entry case, for instance, or corporate case, generally, most of the time, you're going to ask about geography. What's the scope of the geographical scope of the company that you're interested in? So there's a list of questions that are always going to be relevant. So it's worth having them to hand. I think Rishan could have probably asked one more question. Like, he was impressed with time, so he could have asked one more question, potentially around the business context. And here it could have been the fact that there are three new team licenses. He could have asked if there are any other bidders. So if this is a competitive round, or if it's pretty much his client is the only game in town, essentially. That could have helped maybe add a bit more context to his structure. Brownie points is that after asking each questions, it shows a lot of maturity and polish, I think, just give a very short rationale as to why you're asking the question. So the way I sort of think about it is that if you had a new case and your manager or your principal sort of gives you this extremely vague case you're handling, the clarifying question is a way to structure that, to make sure that you scope the case so that you know what not to look for, which is as important as knowing what to look for as well. But when you're asking the questions to your manager or your principal, you sort of want to give a short rationale as well, just so that you're not just shitting from the hip. So I think that's a really good brownie point to add as well. Okay, so on the case structure, 3.5/4, so sort of borderline, good, definitely not going to knock it down. So commercially sensible buckets, which are very important. You don't want to sort of boil the ocean. You want your buckets to be as aligned in terms of importance to the case prompt. And I think Rishon did that very well. And I think the drivers under those buckets were good and they were well explained as well. I think in terms of the communication style, it was pretty good. I could tell when he was transitioning from one bucket to the other. So not much to really push on there. Why isn't it a slam dunk 4? I think he could have added a bit more on valuation straight off the bat. And that the fact that he didn't do that also showed up in the calculations towards the end. So we'll talk about that later. But it's an investment case, whether it's a private equity investor or a corporate investor, you always want to sort of bring out valuation as a bucket. And then under that, sort of explain, well, to get the valuation, you're going to have to project cash flows, but you're not going to do that in a real case most times. So you want to just talk about revenue drivers, some cost drivers as well. You don't have to list all of them out, but I think listing some of them out shows a lot of commercial sensibility. So you definitely want to do that. And that's probably why it wasn't a straight 4. But the whole point of a case structure, essentially, because when I was prepping for Bain, I always thought, why do we always do this? Is it sort of something you have to do? In reality, when you're actually in consulting, your case structure is essentially the case plan. So it actually makes a lot of sense to sort of see how you would scope out a case. And each of those buckets are essentially work streams that a consultant will have autonomy over. And then the drivers under that are things that consultants and maybe AC, so analysts, would also have autonomy over as well. So a consultant could hold 1 or 2 work streams. Maybe the principal holds, another work stream and then overlooks the entire case. And then the drivers are things that you would literally tell people, go look at this. So go figure out, what's happening with revenue, go figure out what's happening with cost, go figure out the impact of this risk. So it's actually quite important for those who thought it was useless. I was one of those who thought it was useless before I actually started working in consulting. Okay, so on to the fun part. Case Matt and Insight, the first one. I thought he did an excellent job on the first one. So it was a 4/4. Great quick insights off the bat, which always sets off really good momentum. And he was generally very confident in communicating problem approach. He got the maths really quickly. He noted that there was a segmentation between the really good teams and what their profit was, and then the less than stellar teams and what their profit was as well. So he noticed the segmentation, which is very important. You always want to look out for segmentation. He did the maths really well. He communicated the approach before doing the maths, which is so important because one, it's just a better way to structure things. Like it's the right precedence, and consultants are obsessed with, order of things. But then 2, had he screwed up the maths, which was hopefully unlikely because it was pretty straightforward maths. But if it was more complex maths, like a round 2 and a very deep operational case, I would have probably given him the benefit of the doubt because he structured the problem very well. And I would be able to tell where things went wrong. If you don't structure the problems well, and I will definitely come back to you once I finish this, I promise. If you don't structure the problem well and you don't communicate the structure and you screw up the maths, then you're totally toast. Like you're pretty much not finished, but you're going to get points deducted. So you definitely want to structure the problem before then going on to do the maths. So lots of candidates talk about how, sometimes they're really good at insights, sometimes they're not. And the truth is that there is a way to be repeatably good at insights. So the structure, the formula I usually go through is 1, 2, 3. So 1, talk through what you're seeing. So take a bit of a deep breath and tell the interviewer that you want to talk through what you're seeing for the first 30 seconds. It's a way of getting the panic out from your head. And you usually will probably see something that's interesting. And so that would be like a great insight that you're putting points on the board essentially, right? So that you don't feel like you are rushed. So you sort of take that first 30 seconds, explain to them that you're talking through what you're seeing, and you put some points on the board as well. Great. So second thing is drawing important insights. So here you want to micro-focus your brain and say, okay, what's interesting? So what Roshan did really well was that he noticed, oh, there are two segments. There's really good teams, there's really bad teams, and inevitably there was a correlation between that, so where the team finished, and also the profit they were getting annually as well. So you want to like really look in and say, are there footnotes? Are there things? Are there correlations? Are there interesting things that sort of really stick out? And here you also want to link. So you want to link what you're seeing to your case prompt. Like, is there anything from the case prompt that would make this exhibit more interesting? And you want to link to prior exhibits as well. So if you've already had an exhibit or a few exhibits and you've gotten some really interesting insights there and answers, you want to link it to what you're seeing as well. So here's where you take your time to really like put everything together. And my best practice is that you want to say the most interesting points, but really go for it. Like, don't just talk about everything and see what sticks. So, don't make it like spaghetti, throwing spaghetti on the wall, but like go over and beyond. And what does over and beyond mean? It's like every insight you can squeeze out, just squeeze out. Like say it's don't keep it in your head. And then the third point is, so what? Okay, so you've talked through the insights really quickly. You've then sort of hyper-focused to really draw some interesting insights by linking. Then the so what is, okay, given all these things I know, how can I link that to moving forward with the business problem? Like, what are one or two things I could do to do that? And again, here Roshan did that really well because he noticed that there was a correlation between how good the team was and their profits. So then I think I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth. He might have spoken about trying to make sure the team is good, like, investing in the quality of the team. That's the so what, right? Like, that's the next inevitable step. So again, here, I think the trick to getting brownie points as well is many times the so what is actually a bit of a brainstorm because it's like, okay, do this. Then the next thing a great candidate will say is, here are the 3 things I could do to do this, right? So if investing in the team is the imperative, then give us 3 things you would do. Maybe go find a legend, go find great coaching staff, like whatever you need to do, right? So you make it a bit of a mini brainstorm. So he did really well there altogether going forward. So where he struggled and what would have probably stopped him from getting into round 2 was the second exhibit. So here he struggled a bit. Now, I don't want to fault him too much, but I guess like, because I could tell that where he was really struggling with was getting the concept of synergies and how that would apply into the profits. So that's just a gap of knowledge, which is a bit annoying because if he knew that, he probably would have aced it. But because it's something that a lot of interviewers would expect you to have seen repeatedly, it's not an excuse. So he probably wouldn't get through to round 2. So here, what he had to do essentially was add the synergies, revenue and cost synergy. Maybe first of all, spend a bit of time talking about what the revenue and cost synergies actually might be, which would have been really good. So like just listing out 1 or 2, cross-selling with, nutritional or the nutritional company in the team, maybe doing advertising, using players to advertise to boost growth, something along those lines. Maybe on marketing as well, potentially, like one bigger marketing budget. So stuff around that. So just quickly talking through that, and then basically adding the revenue and cost synergies to the standalone profit of a championship winning team, because the footnote said you should assume that you're going to get a championship winning team. That's the assumption you're working on. So you wouldn't take the average profit. You would just take the 28 million for the better teams and then add the revenue synergies, add the cost synergies. That would have given you 50 million. And then you would have applied the multiple, which is 25x, to give you 1.25 billion as the valuation. But that wasn't the question, the main question. And that's why it's always important to keep sort of, as you keep going through the case, highlighting what the main problem you're solving is, which is what the bid was. So we know that they want a 20% discount essentially between the valuation and the bid. So you then have to take that 1.25 billion and apply 80% to it to get the actual bid. So if it's valued at 1.25 billion, they're going to be bidding somewhere around 1 billion. And then that's it. You pretty much cracked the case. So moving on to the final recommendation, even though his recommendation was wrong in terms of the number, I still gave it a 4 because the structure was perfect. And this is one of those places where you don't want to be a hero. You can add flourish, but you need structure. And the structure is basically You can spend the first 5-10 seconds recapping the case and what you have to solve, or you can just go straight into the recommendation. That's fine as well. But very firm recommendation, like high conviction. This is exactly what we want to do. Consultants are paid for conviction, even if it's borrowed conviction. So you don't want to sound like you're sitting on the fence, essentially. So recommendation, supporting data, 1, 2, 3. So here I advise going for 2 to 3 points. And one of those points almost always has to be a number, right? Sometimes it can be 2 numbers because you might have calculated more than one thing, but it has to be a number that justifies the rationale. So in this case, it would be the bid. But for some of the supporting data as well, you want to get something qualitative. So you want to go to your case structure or any other case creative brainstorming session you might have had done as well, and basically drag that into the supporting data. So here's why they should do this. Here's the number, but here's a bunch of other things as well that supports that. 2 risks, 2 next steps. And there is literally a bank of risks for almost every case type. You want to specify it so that it's, it doesn't sound like you're being generic, but it's great to know the generic so that you can then apply it to the actual case type as well. And finally, case leadership, which is just executive presence, essentially. Like, did he handle himself really well? Was he friendly? Was he affable? Was he collaborative with the interviewer? That sounds like a given, but there are some interviews where the interviewer is literally almost telling the interviewee, telling the interviewer to shut up, and then it's an obvious automatic fail. So he was highly collaborative, very enthusiastic. He drove the case forward, except for the one part where there was a bit of a gap of knowledge, but he really drove the case forward. He was always providing, okay, here's what we should do next. Here's where I think we should go next. Here's the important thing to do next. Here's how I would prioritize this, which is really strong. So stopping there because we're 1 minute over and I need time for questions. Very strong candidate, probably would have been borderline. If it was a good candidate pool, probably wouldn't have gotten the second round because of he fell short on the second exhibit because of a gap of knowledge, but it's an expected thing to know. So that probably wouldn't, sadly wouldn't count, would still count against him. But yeah, let me know what you guys think and any questions.
Before we let you go today, we'd love for you to take 10 seconds, 15 seconds to leave a quick rating and review for the podcast. If you're enjoying it, because it helps the show reach more people. So wherever you're listening, you can do this, whether on Spotify or on Apple or somewhere else. We'd love for you to take a few seconds to quickly pause this and go leave us a review. Thank you so much for listening to Strategy Simplified, for supporting us, for being a part of our community. Can't wait for the next episode.